Public policy measures is one section in the Resiliency and Public Policy video series. Let's take a critical look at public policy measures and a strategy for their constructive use in fostering the adoption of resiliency under stress in the nation's critical infrastructure. First, the market for resiliency lacks thickness. That is, there is not a sufficient proportion of potential market participants coming together to transact. Second, faced with adversity, the operation of the critical infrastructure may be impacted by congestion, resulting from the cross-cutting, cascading, and propagating effects of systems. Third, participants do not find the market safe and choose instead to operate outside the marketplace to avoid moral hazard, that is, to transact in public-private partnerships. Public policy measures for assuring the resiliency of the critical infrastructure need to be considered in the broad context of barriers and incentives for security economics. Inexpert executives often operate in an information vacuum and refuse to pay a premium for quality, resulting in cheap products that drive out good solutions. Free riders rely on the security investments of others in the public commons, with exposure resting on third-party users. Also, free riders may be reluctant to share information. Risk management practices focus more on avoiding the consequences of liability than on fielding secure systems. For example, the shrink-wrap disclaimers of software suppliers. Commoditized solutions morph into widespread single-point failures. For example, the Internet, Microsoft, and GPS. The legal framework for cybersecurity protection and enforcement is sparsely populated and immature, with the issue of personal privacy unresolved and impacting information sharing. The barriers to information sharing include loss of reputation and trust, risk of liability, negative effects on financial markets, and a signal of weakness to adversaries. There is a moral hazard associated with reluctance to share information. Those that possess superior knowledge and use it to insulate themselves from risk are subject to moral hazard when they refuse to share information and leave others to suffer the consequences. Such is the case when the executives in the private sector associated with critical infrastructure refuse to share sufficient information to identify and assess the consequences of cross-cutting issues. A key example of a moral hazard is the refusal to coordinate recovery time objectives among the industry sectors of the critical infrastructure, when failure to do so obscures foreseeable consequences to customers and the public. In applying due diligence on behalf of its customers, its stockholders, and the public, the enterprise has an obligation to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. The current public-private partnership approach to cybersecurity is stalled, with its participants adopting a go-along, get-along posture. Suppliers and security vendors seem to cling to the critical infrastructure protection paradigm at the expense of consumers and the public who need critical infrastructure resilience. To what extent is the current impasse due to a lack of commitment or to a lack of know-how? If the shortfall is commitment, then we need the carrot and stick to energize the community. If the shortfall is know-how, then we need research and engineering and targeted investment to enlighten the community. Either way, we need to expand our thinking on public policy measures for cybersecurity beyond commoditized protection to a higher ground that includes audited processes, certified engineering, and research and engineering. Both government and industry have responsibilities to reconcile the conflicting factors, falling along the following lines. While the government cannot make us safe from cyber attack, it can tilt the business calculation towards security through tax credits, insurance mechanisms, and indemnification designed to reward security readiness through self-help measures. Since it is the industry software products that make us vulnerable to a cyber attack, and since private industry controls 80 to 85% of the critical infrastructure, industry must make the sacrifices needed to achieve security by rebalancing its cost-effectiveness tactics and ensuring the readiness and survivability of software products and systems. Balancing the duality of market-driven incentives and regulatory processes is a challenge, one that requires a high degree of sophistication. Deployment of the maturity framework is accelerated by selecting the right mix of public policy measures. The right mix of public policy accords as much self-determination as possible and invokes as little regulation as necessary. Public policy needs to tilt towards market-driven incentives. While business interests and fiduciary responsibilities trump the public interest, the innovative challenge for government policymakers is to structure a constellation of public policy measures in such a way as to permit private industry executives the freedom to align their fiduciary responsibilities with the public interest through market-driven incentives. Commitment to security depends on the transparent assessment of commitment assisted by market-driven tactics. Security in depth depends on commoditized protection assisted by self-help remedies and insurance mechanisms. Business continuity depends on audited processes assisted by self-help remedies, insurance mechanisms, tax policy, and import tariffs. System survivability depends on certified engineering assisted by self-help remedies, targeted investment, insurance mechanisms, tax policy, and guiding regulations. System of systems resiliency depends on research and engineering assisted by self-help remedies, targeted investment, insurance mechanisms, tax policy, guiding regulations, and targeted legislation. The table portrays the public policy incentives for increasing levels of confidence assigned to the evidence supporting the arguments at each maturity level. These incentives reward telling the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth during a resiliency assurance maturity assessment. The maximum incentives are reserved for arguments backed up by evidence that is beyond the shadow of a doubt. When Level 2 demonstrates management commitment and commoditized security in depth, the enterprise may access insurance mechanisms. When Level 3 demonstrates business continuity and necessary compliance, the enterprise may access additional insurance mechanisms and tax benefits. When Level 4 and 5 demonstrate necessary engineering and innovation, the enterprise may access targeted investment. Self-help remedies are backed up by indemnification, and additional insurance mechanisms and tax benefits are available. Organizing and ordering incentives and timing regulatory measures demand sophistication. How well can the government position itself as a player within a market-driven system? Above all, it is necessary to preserve market-driven freedom to enhance the reputation of the enterprise. Self-help remedies, insurance mechanisms, and tax policy then become the catalyst for the early incentives needed to trigger and encourage widespread adoption. Once there is traction, the Resiliency Maturity Assessment mandate can be introduced as a means to stimulate competition among peers to improve resiliency maturity assurance. With adoption moving well beyond early adopters and momentum building, the more heavy-duty incentives kick in, including indemnification for self-help remedies, targeted investment, and additional insurance and tax benefits. Finally, guiding regulations are introduced to achieve the best possible alignment among all focus areas and all industry sectors.